can't recommend Intel CPUs right now, not until there's either some level of first-party transparency and a support assurance from Intel itself, or until we or some other third party are able to verify why its CPUs are not stable in some situations, which CPUs might be affected, what those conditions are, and how you might resolve it. It's a very complex issue right now. We've received a number of tips for the story spanning several months now. We've been working with Wendell from Level1 Techs on it behind the scenes, and now that you've seen our recent video with him more publicly. So the tips span the whole gamut of things. I mean, it's been everything from solar storms to the sort of usual suspect of frequency, voltage, memory capabilities, and then one interesting one, which is a possible fabrication level defect causing oxidation of the vias, and this would be through some level of contamination during that process. So if this were the case, it would be due to issues with deposition of tantalum nitride during the atomic layer deposition stages of gate formation for the CPUs. This could cause higher resistance and vulnerability to electromigration, which would lead to things like degradation, instability, and would explain a lot. But just to emphasize, it is a tip currently. It's one that is credible, that we have documentation for, and that we are working on investigating, but it's still a tip. It's not confirmed. Less damning information leads from people in the audience who are within the industry at large OEMs and elsewhere include things like memory instability above DDR5 4000, which is really bad, and things like reducing the all-core multiplier, of course, to never exceed things in the range of 53x to 55x, depending on which OEM we're talking to. There's the challenge, though, of if Intel is suddenly unable to deliver on its advertised and reviewed performance, then it may have some serious legal exposure, which is probably why they've been so quiet. So the plan was to work on this quietly and attempt to validate these until we could isolate the most likely failure mode. And that is something that requires at least weeks, if not months, because the fabrication level defect tip we have, that requires a failure analysis lab. That is not something we are capable of or qualified to investigate on our own, and failure analysis labs can take weeks, if not months, depending on what it is. It's something we're working on, though. But we did want to put this video out because we have a bit of a problem. The problem is that there are new CPUs coming out in like a week or two, Zen 5 CPUs, and that means we're going to have reviews. The reviews will have Intel CPUs in them. And the problem we have is, how are we supposed to test the Intel CPUs? Because it is currently completely unclear if it's like the power limits might change, if the frequency or the voltage might change, if the boosting behavior may be tweaked, even if it's a small tweak just to get some stability, to get these CPUs across the line within their relevant life cycle for enthusiast systems or something. So instead of completing the investigation and then releasing it, we are instead going to release everything we currently have that appears to be at least somewhat credible, that we have some form of documentation or leaks to back up. It is possible that all of these factors contribute in some ways. For example, it may be the case that some chips do have some of this oxidation problem, and some chips are just boosting too high or have too high of a voltage. There's always nuance there. It could also be all of them combined. It could be some of them are completely dead or inaccurate leads. But right now, we just need to define what our path forward is for benchmarking Intel. And who knows, maybe alongside other videos that are coming out, this might start to put some pressure on Intel to get a statement out there, hopefully in time for if there needs to be any retesting for the Zen 5 reviews, because if there is no statement and we're just left in the dark on what it might be, then we have no assurance or confidence in the product or the company behind it. And that means right now our blanket statement is we cannot comfortably recommend Intel CPUs, and it's going to be that simple until they say something so that we know a little bit more about what the scope of this is. All right. Let's get into it. Before that, this video is brought to you by Squarespace, and visiting squarespace.com/gamersnexus will give you 10% off your first purchase with them. We've built a number of our own websites with Squarespace, where we list catastrophic PC hardware failures to inform subscribers of those failures. We also built our store website with Squarespace using its built-in e-commerce tools, and of course, we built a website for our CEO Snowflake because she demanded our audience know who really runs the show. Get to the core of your idea and spend less time on web design by signing up at squarespace.com/gamersnexus or click the link below. First of all, a quick call to action. If you have an Intel failed CPU, something that you feel like has degraded or is unstable, we could really use the date code information that is on the lid of that CPU. So what I'm gonna do is we'll put an image up on the screen of an Intel CPU. We're gonna draw a box around the information that we need, and then we would like you to take that and head over to a Google form I've created where you can type that information in along with the SKU of the CPU itself, and then we'll be able to take that and start to try and figure out if there's like a date range or something. There's a lot of chaos behind the scenes right now. We wouldn't be surprised if Intel scrambles to put out some kind of statement in the coming days. It needs to be fast though, because everyone's already testing for Zen 5 reviews. And like I said, our default, I would hope Intel doesn't try to delay past them, because if they do, it's gonna look like they're trying to cover it up. And our default is gonna be no recommendation of Intel 13th or 14th gen CPUs until we know more officially. So here's a quick recap. If you're out of the loop on all this, the rapid version is that Intel has had ongoing stability issues with its 13th and 14th gen CPUs. These are in the Raptor Lake families. They date back minimally 6 months. We have some reports going back to March of 2023. These stability issues can manifest in different ways. It makes them difficult to troubleshoot. Wendell from Level 1 Techs has an excellent video on sort of the enterprise server side of this, and W680 boards, things like that. We talked with him in a separate video. You can check on the channel if you want some foundational knowledge there. Some of the examples of instability include errors of exceeding GPU VRAM, errors that can trigger anti-cheat bans, BSODs or general crashes, and then decompression errors, among others. We need to define the word failure for this video really quickly. So failure, from our point of view, doesn't necessarily mean the CPU is completely dead and inoperable, as in will no longer boot. It means it cannot meet the spec while remaining operational and stable with an acceptable amount of errors. So not just constant crashes. So that's our definition of failure for this video. As a reminder, Wendell's data point with the W680 motherboards tranquilizes some of the excessive voltage concerns in some ways. Kind of interesting, actually. It's a whole separate thing he talks about. Critically, though, it supports one of the tips that we received, which was the fabrication level defect tip. Now, I've been in close contact with Wendell since before he published that, and we've been working on trying to figure things out between the information both of us have, because it's kind of different. And he and I both agreed when I told him I was going to film this piece that there needs to be a bit of a dose of reality too. So we also wanted to be very clear that it's not certain how widespread the issue with 13th and 14th gen is, and that's one of the challenges. It's also difficult to filter processor issues from unstable motherboard settings, user configuration settings, things like that. That's why this has been such a challenge. Wendell also noted that he has some server contacts approaching 50% defect rates, but he was very careful to note that he believes about half of those might be recoverable. So in sort of the best case with just those simple numbers, you'd be looking at 25% for that provider at least. Early stage rumors indicated power plan problems. This is something that Hardware Unboxed did very well to benchmark and try all the different rumored Intel power plan changes in BIOS. Rumored power plans varied wildly, where it was anywhere as significant as taking something like a 14900K and chopping the PL in half down to like 125 watts from 253 or whatever it was, to steps in between. And so that was bad enough that Intel put out a statement at some point because there was so much back and forth with leaks and rumors and what motherboard vendors were doing. So it's been a mess. Now to get into the information we've received. So that was kind of your timeline of big content pieces up to now that we think have done a good job of covering different aspects of this. And we want to be extremely clear and transparent again that we are in the process of validating the claims we've received. That means they are not validated. So we cannot blindly trust any one of them. It's going to take some time. So with that said, first, we have a contact at a major Intel customer. I think it might be, it's possible it's their biggest customer, but it's definitely one of the top three. And the contact has informed us that the current estimate points toward over 8 million 13th gen CPUs, which may be affected for that customer alone. Of those 8 million 13th gen CPUs, 6.1 million are narrowed down to a list of these 11 SKUs. We'll put it on the screen. The current known failure rate for that customer is a range. So the actual affected units versus the possible total affected units, which are the numbers I just gave you, actual is a range of 10% to 25%. The reason for the range is because some groups within it's a very large company, some groups within the company have seen a higher rate of failure, others are estimating lower, depends on where they work. Taking these numbers then, 10% to 25%, you just do a simple multiplied across the whole company, assume the same failure rate. They would be in the range of 600,000 to 2 million, plus or minus, failed units out of those units in the SKU batch that was on the screen. Now, critically, the customer does not yet have information on 14th gen products. That is 13th gen only, and one of our contacts was nervous about how that's going to develop going forward. So we don't have news on the 14th gen side of things. It is expected to be affected, though, based on some of Wendell's reporting and other reporting out there. A different contact told us that this is expected to affect the units from March of 2023 through at least April 2024. And then the short list of tips with some level of confidence, including Intel official internal documentation we've received, includes these possible contributors to failure. This is the top level. So one lead claims that Intel has an issue in its fabrication process where its anti-oxidation coating was improperly applied, leading to oxidized vias. For this one, GN is hiring a failure analysis lab to try and get the CPUs analyzed for this defect. We don't currently have a timeline. It will take some time to do. It is possible Intel puts out a statement, and hopefully likely, before we have any of that done. And that's fine. We'll still finish it, even if this is kind of like resolved in that respect, just so we can dig into that one to make sure we cover all the bases. Make sure that nothing can be buried for later. Another one. So a lead claims that Intel is working on microcode revisions to roll out ASAP. And the microcode is rumored to reduce the processor frequency. This is a direct leaker to us. This does not fix the root cause. It would, however, work around and feasibly resolve the problem, at least in sort of the midterm. Another lead of ours works at a large Intel customer. They have stated that reducing the maximum frequency for boosting to a 5.3 gigahertz clock or 53X was able to work around the issue. A leaked document that GN has verified shows that at least one Intel customer is purging some of its inventory as a result of these issues. And then an allegedly leaked document, it shows a change of the maximum officially supported memory frequency. Now, this is something that I was actually talking with Wendell about. He is an indirect source of that. And it shows one DPC reduced down to DDR5 4800 from DDR5 5600, ignoring XMP capabilities. And then unrelated to the root cause, but related to the impact of these failures, we've received a list of affected customers. And this list includes customers as big, and we'll call them important, as hedge funds and investment firms. One of them is Citadel. So in other words, these are some of the groups that are affected by failed CPUs and are very angry with the suppliers of the systems that contain those CPUs. The reason I bring this up is because those kinds of companies are the ones that can put pressure on companies the size of Intel. So it is possible this gets moving pretty quickly now. Let's start with the via formation and the oxidation claims. So we received a document that states this, quote, "The root cause of this mechanism is due to a random defect mode in the fabrication process of the Raptor Lake CPU during the via formation steps, which could cause high resistance vias due to oxidation." We're not able to show the documents even blurred. I can put the quote on the screen like we've done, but that's because the documents would pinpoint who we're speaking to. We also received a leak that Intel has confirmed the following processors are allegedly known to be affected from the 13 series. The i9 13900T, 13900, 13900F, the i7 13700K, 13700KF, 13700, 13700T, the i5 13600K, 13600KF, and the i9 13900K and 13900KF. These comprise 6.1 million of the 8+ million total units from one large Intel customer we spoke with. And of those, you get the 10 to 25% possible failure rate number that we mentioned earlier. The possible total affected units is not necessarily units that are currently affected with instability. It is units that the company is worried might be subject to it. So then we get back down to that sort of 600,000 to 2 million or so, plus or minus, of actual known in the field failures at this point. We heard that the 14 series should map to this, but we don't have those yet. The 13700T here is actually particularly important because the 13700T, kind of like Wendell's findings with the server-side motherboards, this is a CPU with a low power envelope, and it won't be overclocked. And we have at least one of those that's failed and on the way, so that we can hopefully look into it. The failure of these CPUs, if aligned with other defects being discussed, would support a possible theory of this sort of via oxidation or fabrication level defect, because the lower power requirements would reduce the likelihood of it being some kind of excessive voltage, excessive frequency, push too hard situation. And this also aligns with what Wendell was saying, which was that if you watch his video, he talked about his opinions shifting from being more likely a microcode fix to being possibly a physical hardware issue with the CPUs. We agree with his commentary there. Now, our whole involvement in this began when someone in the industry emailed us this claim, quote, "It's important that the power limiter issue doesn't lead this story. It's not a power limit on the board issue, it's a chip issue and always has been. The power limit issue was fixed with microcode. We have no idea if it affects Meteor Lake or not yet. The current possible affected processors are about 8 million shipped that we know of." And again, that was for that one specific customer. This is where we start getting into that oxidation claim. So this came up because the source told us that improper application of anti-oxidation solutions might be leading to contamination that results in processor instability. And they said, and this is key, especially at higher speeds and higher voltages. Here's a quote: "If you disable turbo boost, you can get stability," in scare quotes, "until the corrosion or contamination make the CPU fault. We have reports of some CPUs that will not even boot without blue screening because the contamination or corrosion is so bad." And again, this is a source that is close to one of Intel's largest customers. Reaching out to a failure analysis lab contact we were given this information just for background. So they said, quote, "Tantalum nitride is used as a barrier layer to prevent diffusion of copper into the interlevel dielectric or glass. It's applied to the topology during the fab process using atomic layer deposition. After coating the outer walls of a via hole with tantalum nitride and a copper seed layer, the via copper deposition occurs and the via hole is filled with copper. I've attached a paper that talks about ALD and its challenges. We'll show that on the screen, parts of it anyway. A couple sections stand out. The contact said, Figure 6 and the limitation section on page 6. ALD's advantages bring with it serious challenges, where recipes have to be carefully tweaked for the application. Tantalum nitride is used everywhere in the metal stack, so it's plausible that all layers could be affected. This also confirms that it's not an issue with the interposer. The FA lab also said this, for background, quote, "With ALD of tantalum nitride, the choice of precursors and reaction conditions are critical to prevent unwanted oxidation of underlying materials, such as copper. Here's how ALD precursors for tantalum nitride might lead to the oxidation of copper. 1. Oxygen-containing precursors. Some precursors used in the ALD process might contain oxygen or release oxygen-containing byproducts during the reaction. If these byproducts come into contact with copper, they can oxidize the copper surface. 2. Water as a co-reactant. If water is used as a co-reactant in the process, it can lead to the formation of copper oxide due to its oxidizing nature. Water is commonly used in ALD to form metal oxides, and its presence needs to be carefully controlled to avoid oxidation of copper. 3. Temperature and plasma conditions. High temperatures or plasma conditions used during ALD can facilitate the diffusion of oxygen into the copper layer, leading to oxidation. The energy provided by the plasma can break down precursors more completely, potentially releasing more reactive oxygen species. And 4, incomplete purging. In ALD, the reactor chamber is purged between precursor pulses to remove excess reactants and byproducts. Incomplete purging can leave residual oxygen-containing species in the chamber, which can react with the copper surface in subsequent cycles. To better understand what all this means, here's one last section from our contact. Here's an amazing graphic detailing the interconnect layers down to silicon with a solder bump at the top of the image, which would connect the chip to the interposer carrier. Note that the black border around each copper 2, 3, etc. is the tantalum nitride barrier metal layer. Everywhere that you want to make a copper trace, you have to deposit tantalum nitride first, in this example anyway. Copper 3 connects to copper 2 through a via, which also needs that tan outer lining. As you can see, the issue could occur at any of the metallization levels in vias. And this image is not specific to Intel. I think it's just from Wikipedia, strictly for educational purposes. So that's kind of the recap of that potential problem. And for this lead, we will not be able to progress until the FA lab we're hiring completes its analysis. The lab has warned us that it only has about a 50% success rate on root-causing chips of this level of complexity. Normally, the way they work around that is by doing multiple samples. I'm still kind of waiting on quotes. We're going to send them as many as we can afford, and it's possible this kind of gets into 5-figure territory per CPU. Not really sure yet. So depending on that, we may not be able to do more than 1 to 2, but I'm going to do my best. And like I said, it is extremely likely that this story develops further before we get an answer back. And that's fine, and we're fine with that, because either way, this would tell us a lot. And if this is a stone that's otherwise left unturned as microcode updates come out and people generally are happier with the level of stability, we can turn that stone over and see if there was ever anything there, and if so, how that might affect whatever fixes or statements Intel puts out. So that's the plan. Anyway, even if it is a fabrication level defect, that doesn't mean all the CPUs are doomed. So to be clear about that, this is something where it's possible that tweaking the boosting behavior through microcode is able to do enough that it never becomes an issue. So that's one possibility. Now, failure rates, we'll talk about those for a minute. So these are not specific to an oxidation issue. These are just failure rates, period. Information we've gotten from speaking with people in the industry. Some mention oxidation concerns, some don't. One source told us that Intel is telling OEMs that it has observed a 0.035% worldwide failure rate. This is in conflict with the OEM we spoke with, which stated that it has observed a 10 to 25% failure rate, and the 25% aligns pretty closely with servers from Wendell's list of contacts, where Wendell stated again that they saw upwards of 50% stability problems on Intel CPUs, where he thought maybe half of those might be recoverable, leading to a possible 25% total rate. And this is critical too. The information we got was prior to Wendell publishing his video, so that means that the two sources talking to each of us were unaware of the developments of the story, and so hopefully that gives us a little more trust in the information. One source stated this, quote, "Either Intel is lying or they don't know the real failure rate. Until last month, they reported to us that 10% of their production was still having the oxidation issue." Now, GN has been informed by multiple parties that Intel is beginning a process it calls vendor remediation for its OEM customers. Our understanding is that OEMs are reimbursed for the replacement cost of chips that are defective as a result of an Intel fault specifically. Working with a medium-sized American system integrator, GN learned that the SI is failing 12% of its Intel CPUs during intake quality assurance. When we were trying to understand why some SIs were seeing a higher rejection rate of Intel CPUs, the same models, we began digging into the QA processes of these companies, and from what we can try to correlate here, it appears as if the vendors using more intensive burn-in tests for longer periods of time, particularly with tests such as decompression, Y-cruncher style tests, those seemed to correlate with higher rates of rejection as opposed to SIs that use shorter tests that are more limited in scope. And then this kind of matches with some of Level 1 Techs findings as well. One OEM told us that they are considering limiting turbo clocks to 5.4 to 5.5 gigahertz as an interim step to reduce their own chance of RMAs. And another SI we spoke with is spooling up some SKUs for AMD Ryzen CPUs while it waits for Intel to do something. And that leads to the other possible failure mode, which is just general platform instability and frequencies. So this, alongside higher voltage, could lead to degradation of the silicon early in its life, and Buildzoid recently spoke about this on his channel. So the solution to this might be that earlier mentioned microcode update, the leaks we got, if they turn out to be true. It's possible that Intel could stop most of the failures at the very top end of the frequency at least by changing the boosting behavior, bringing the voltage down in step with that. Now, the biggest sort of outlier or question mark we have with that goes back to that T-series, not that T-series, T-series CPU, the 13700T and other T-series Intel CPUs, where those don't really fit for that. So maybe it's related, maybe it's not, but either way, it could get, you can see how it could get complicated with motherboard vendors having to tweak their behavior as well, Intel tweaking the microcode, and us being back in a place where it's just like, we don't know how to guess at what to run for benchmarks until they finalize something. And that aligns with memory speed rumors. So one of the most recent ones we saw was a document suggesting that Intel may reduce the officially supported maximum DDR5 speeds If that turns out to be the case, then that would be a big problem. We don't know if that's going to be final. Document stated DDR5 4800. I think that was one DPC. Now we get into the what this means important part from a consumer standpoint. So all of that said, just to reiterate, we don't know which of those things might be the problem. What is clear is that there is a problem. And that problem potentially, it seems like, spans millions of units that have already been affected when you start looking at these big enterprise and OEM clients, which also might help to explain the question I asked Wendell when I talked with him in our recent video of, if this is so widespread, why aren't we seeing it literally everywhere? And it may just be the case that certain clients, like big server farms, experience these failures or these instability problems sooner in the life of the, well, sooner in the chronological time of the chip because it's getting used more. So there could be a lot of factors involved. But we have to stress some points here. We don't know the failure rate. We don't know if there are multiple failures involved. We don't know how many are affected. If one fix resolves the, we'll call it main issue, whatever that is, it may not fix all the problems we are hearing about and likely won't. This will probably be a multi-pronged approach from Intel. And then it is possible that a fix involves changing the CPU behavior in some way from how it was shipped. Whether that's small or large, it would be a change. We would need to accommodate that in our testing processes. That is a lot of important things. We're trying to encourage responsible discourse here while everyone's working through figuring it out. And so our next steps include some weeks of work with an FA lab. Hopefully they can get something done for us. And then the most immediate action for us is how it affects our reviews. And that is where we get into what our job is here. So our job is to test products and represent them as a consumer is going to use it. That includes an out-of-the-box use case. And that means we need to evaluate if we think it's a good purchase based on the value of its competitors, which is an equation that includes its performance. And because our reviews are largely based on value, that involves product longevity in the consideration. At this moment, Intel has acknowledged that there's a problem. It hasn't said what it is, and that's a problem for us. It's a different problem. So because of these uncertainties, here's our approach. We cannot reasonably begin randomly changing variables in BIOS and land on whatever it is Intel is going to do until we have official information. And because of that, any retesting with variable changes to PL1, PL2, memory speed, the actual processor maximum boosting without changing PL1 or 2, any of those changes is effectively, it's going to be kind of random what we actually end up depicting with it. So for now, unless something changes between now and when Zen 5 reviews launch, our plan is to include data for the CPUs. None of ours have experienced any kind of instability, and we will use the Intel official guidance settings. In other words, no change from our prior test for Intel until something more is known. We will make it clear to the audience, though, in those reviews and right now, that we are currently not comfortable recommending any Intel 13th or 14th gen CPUs until there's more transparency about what specifically the problem is and what specifically a solution might be, including the means for third party to then immediately enact that solution or do so as soon as possible to reevaluate and look at the performance if it has changed, because the product needs to be represented as it should be used, not as it is used with a potential change in the pipeline. If sometime in the next few days to a week Intel changes this, they modify something in the CPUs, we will immediately begin rerunning things. We'll get as many done as we can for the Zen 5 reviews. And at that time, if that happens, depending on the impact of the changes, we can also talk about things like false advertising if in fact it does reduce the performance. But we'll kind of save that for when we see what the change is, if there is one. We think this kind of finds a good balance, which is currently there's no guidance on what to change, if anything, but we also don't feel comfortable recommending them. So that'll kind of be it. Maybe if enough people are at this point, it'll pressure them to do something anyway. And as a final note, we have 2 CPU revisits that are filmed right now. And those are going to be going up with the current Intel official guidance. That means if there's a microcode after today, July 19th, then it won't be in those data sets for the 2 revisits coming up. It would, however, be in the Zen 5 reviews as long as Intel ships it in the next, 5 days or so. So that'll kind of be it. And we'll stop there for now. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more. There's a lot more to talk about. Sorry this isn't conclusive and definitive. Tried to make that really clear up front. And like I said, normally we like to really know the answer before we dive deep into these things. But the proximity of the upcoming reviews is like, okay, we gotta make sure people understand that we're gonna test them kind of defaults, so to speak, in official guidance, but we are also not recommending the CPUs. That was important, wanted to get that out there. And then also try and collect some information from people. So if you're in the audience and you have information about anything we've talked about here, especially if you're in the industry, then email us at tips, T-I-P-S, at gamersnexus.net. Let us know what you know that you think might be useful to us, and then we will keep it anonymous unless you say otherwise. And if we want to put it on record, we'll ask you. So that's it for this one. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more. Go to store.gamersnexus.net to support us directly, or patreon.com/gamersnexus. It helps us fund things like sending stuff out to failure analysis labs, which again can be 5-figure costs. So that's it. We'll see you all next time.